Sir?
So, before you share your screen, I'll just say a few words.
Yes, sir.
So, welcome all of you to this yet another program on the PG Bonanza webinar series organized by Dr. of Manipal KMC. And I have a lot of pleasure in moderating this session because two of my very good friends, Dr. Mukund Prabhu and Dr. Manish Rai, who are top notch, though they are very young to look and as well as by age, they are some of the top electrophysiologists, highly respected people in the country. So it's a golden opportunity for all of you to listen to them, to go through some ECGs in the next 1.5 hours or so. And ECG, from the exam point of view, may not be very relevant because if you may get a case, there will be an ECG of that patient given to you. So that is a small interpretation. And sometimes if you're lucky, some spotters will have some ECG. Other than that, from the exam point of view, ECG may not be a major deciding factor to decide your fate in the examination. But having said that, ECG is the most inexpensive tool among all investigations in cardiology practice. It is the cheapest thing. It can be recorded in few minutes. And the information that you get from an ECG is very vast, provided you have the eye to look at it. And that comes with knowledge. So every ECG will be very, very useful, whether it is electrolyte abnormality, whether it is ischemia, whether it is myocardial infarction, whether it is bradyarrhythmia, whether it is tachyarrhythmia. So much of diagnostic clues you can get from the ECG. Patients with parathyroid tumors have been diagnosed initially from the ECG because of changes of hypercalcemia in the ECG with short QT interval for that matter. So the ECG can be an extremely useful tool, provided you have the knowledge base to look for certain things in the ECG. An ECG gives a wealth of information, provided you have the knowledge to look for in a particular ECG. So with that background, I have a lot of pleasure in inviting both Dr. Mukund Prabhu and Dr. Manish Rai, associate professors from Manipal and Mangalore respectively, very good friends of mine. I am as interested in going through these ECGs along with all of you. Over to you, Mukund and Manish.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind words. It's a pleasure to present with Natarajan sir. He is my first TP teacher, right from my MD days, and I learned a lot from him. I think my screen is shared, right?
Yes, you have to go to full screen.
Yeah. Manish will join in 5 or 10 minutes. He had called me. Okay, just before we start, this is a quote from Albert Einstein. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So that's what I always like to think about the ECGs. ECGs are simple, but not the simplest. So we'll have to spend some time before decoding. So we'll straight away go to the first case. I think Dr. Deepanjan is going to present this. It's an ECG of 62-year lady, underwent some cardiac procedure, not 2 years, sorry, 12 years back, and presented with syncope and fall.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes, sir. This ECG is showing up a baseline complete heart block with an atrial rate of around like 75. And we can see that there are ventricular spikes, but they are not following each P wave. And some of the QRS, they are paced and they are having a wide like QRS. With which is positive in lead 1 and AVL and like negative in leads 2, 3 and AVF. So like probably it's a right RV apical like pacing. And we can see that the pacing spikes, they are also irregular. They are coming intermittently. And so there is like since already 12 years are over, usually this and the mode is looking like VVI mode.
You are with the name Indra Prakash, right?
Sir?
Correct. Now you are.
Hello. So one possibility may be that this patient has already reached ERI because of it was done around like 12 years back. So the pacing spikes are like not like falling in place, and also we can see that the pacing spike, it is not generating the QRS.
Yes. Are you done, Deepanjan? Shall I proceed? Yeah, that's a very good observation, Deepanjan. It's an excellent deduction. So this is actually complete heart block with the junctional escape. And points that perhaps you missed is one is high atrial rate. It's very important in any bradyarrhythmia or any complete heart block, not bradyarrhythmia, complete heart block, because high atrial rate generally correlates with a higher sympathetic tone, and any small tilt is enough for decompensation, which includes heart failure, cardiogenic shock and all. So any patient with high atrial rate, you should be extra cautious. It's not stable. There's impending instability. Even the BP is normal.
Okay.
Another thing is QT prolongation. These are brady-induced QT changes, repolarization abnormalities, and such patient can develop torsades, especially so when some of the beats are captured and some are not. That triggers that long short sequence, which is the best milieu for triggering a torsades, pause-dependent torsades.
Yes,
As you rightly mentioned, the spikes are about 70, but not consistently capturing. Neither are they regular. Some spikes are varying in rate. I'll mark that. I'll show in the next slide. And probably that is due to the ERI behavior. And because, as you mentioned already, atrial rate and spike rates are different, probably VUA mode is likely, and only one set of spikes are seen.
Yes,
You can see here, where we assume it as 70 per minute, 820 milliseconds. The blue arrows are where the spikes should have come, or the next cycle has been reset from here, rather than the red areas. Anyway, the spikes are not regular, so probably this is an ERI behavior. So learning points from this ECG is analysis of pacemaker ECG needs assessment of pacing function as well as the sensing function. And the loss of capture can be due to high threshold due to any cause, including lead displacement, perforation, fracture, and of course, ERI. Oversensing is another abnormality, less common in bipolar and more common in unipolar mode. And bradycardia sometimes induce repolarization changes, which are harbinger for torsades. Want to add something else, Natran sir?
No. It's more than ERI. This could be even later than the ERI. This patient came to us. At ERI, the patient still has normal pacemaker function, so it must be nearing end of service of the pacemaker.
Yes,
erratic pacing, loss of capture in most of the pacing spikes means the pacemaker generator has hardly any charge left inside. So it's almost like end of service of the pacemaker, even later than ERI. That's what I
Yes, sir. That's correct, sir. I should have used the word EOL rather than ERI. This is the second case. Sudhakar, who is presenting?
Dr. Indu Prakash.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Please go ahead.
Sir, I'm Dr. Indu Prakash from Jayadeva Institute, sir. This is a 63 years old man. Case of CAD, post PTCA with severe LV dysfunction. Underwent another procedure 6 months after PTCA. Came with palpitation. That procedure that he had undergone must be ICD. And this is a limb lead ECG showing different QRS morphologies. Initially, 4 beats are pacing beats. Then longest one is wide QRS, regular tachycardia. Rate is around 140 to 150. And QRS duration is more than 120, and you can see AV dissociation lead to, and here at the right side of the screen, after train of 8 beats, the tachycardia was terminated. This is
Mugund, as he interprets, you can use them because only you can use the mouse. So you can also use the mouse for the sake of others to benefit. Whatever Indu Prakash is saying, you can take the audience along with him. Yeah.
Fine, sir. Fine. Go ahead.
After train of 8 beats, tachycardia was terminated, and you can see the sinus beats. This is VT with anti-tachycardia pacing, sir. Mostly a ramp pacing, sir.
Excellent, Indu. Yeah, you are correct in most aspects. I just marked whatever you have told. The ECG actually starts with a pace rhythm. Pace rhythm is pretty fast at around 165, and no pacemaker is capable of this rate. So it should be ICD. You can see the spike followed by the wider QRS, and after a short run of ATP, you can see the native rhythm, which is again a relatively narrower wide QRS tachycardia. with the AV dissociation. And not only that, here is a capture beat, marked a blue arrow. And after that, another run of ATP is attempted by the device, followed by a capture, probably a fusion beat, and some 6 more beats of ATP, which finally ends in sinus rhythm. Agree, we have to see consecutive 2 sinus beats to call it as termination. But if you count the cycle length, you should have expected 1 more QRS here in the end of the switch, which is not there. So probably the ATP was successful. And regarding ramp, I'm not sure, because in ramp pacing, we expect the cycle length to shorten as the train progress. Whereas in this train, the pacing cycle length appears the same, constant. So I would call it burst rather than ramp. But otherwise, everything you have told is very much correct. And some learning points from this ECG. ATP is a very effective means to terminate a VT, especially in slow VTs less than 170 per minute. So while programming any ICD, you should always have a prescription of a set of ATPs in the slower zones of tachycardia, so that you can avoid shocks. And I think it is rare to capture an ATP in the surface ECG, so that makes this ECG even more interesting. Anything else, sir? Natan, sir?
The most important point is the first point which you have written. It's very rare. I've never been able to capture a ATP terminating a VT in the surface ECG in a patient with an ICD. We have all seen intracardiac recordings of the device when the patient comes, but to be lucky enough to record an ECG when it is being done, that is extremely unusual, and that is a very beautiful ECG that you have shown. Having said that, even in the VF zone, let's say 220 per minute, if you keep the VF detection, lot of tachycardias in the VF zone can actually be rapid ventricular tachycardia. So even in that zone, you can keep ATP during charging. The device charges for a VF, but it also delivers an ATP in that zone. And a lot of times the tachycardia can actually get terminated, provided it is a rapid monomorphic ventricular tachycardia in the VF rate. You keep VF detection rate at 200 per minute. And if it so happens that it is a monomorphic VT at 200 per minute, ATP can terminate. That is why nowadays in all ICDs, we keep ATP during charging, even in the VF zone, though Mukund has written that works best in VTs less than 170. Sometimes even rapid ventricular tachycardias can actually terminate during an ATP during ICD. Carry on, Mukund.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I have one doubt, sir.
Yeah, please.
Which is better, sir, in terms of success, either burst pacing and ramp, sir, advantages and disadvantages?
The latest data favors a burst pacing. So previously ramp was considered more effective. The latest data actually favors a burst pacing.
Mukund, can you go to the ECG? We'll explain to the audience what is ramp and what is, show the previous ECG. Yeah, what Dr. Mukund Prabhu and Dr. Indu Prakash are telling is, if you look at the pacing cycle length, can you just trace it, the second sequence of ATP, can you go to? Yeah, not that one, the next one. From there onwards, there are 8 pace beats. If you see the QRR intervals of the paced rhythm, it is constant here. So this is a constant pacing of the ventricle at a rate faster than that of the ventricular tachycardia. If the cycle interval, if the first 2 RR intervals are a little longer, and then the next 2 pace beats are faster, and the next 2 is still faster, we call it ramp. In other words, the pacing cycle length, as Dr. Mukund said, gets faster and faster within that 8 beats. That is called ramp protocol. Okay. We'll go to the third ECG.
Sir, Dr. Manish has also joined, sir.
Yeah, welcome, Manish. So that was presenting the third ECG. Can you invite them?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Sagar, sir, from Amrita Hospital. I'm presenting the third ECG. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, welcome, Sagar. Please go ahead.
So this is a rhythm strip showing 3 leads. It has normal standardization. There is ventricular rate is around 50 per minute, and the atrial rate, each QRS is not, each P wave is not followed by a QRS complex. There is about 2:1 conduction, but the PR interval seems constant. The atrial rate is around 90 per minute. So this looks most likely a 2:1 block, second degree AV block, 2:1. it will be difficult to tell whether it is a type 1 or a type 2 Mobitz block in a 2:1 block. But as it is a narrow QRS morphology, I would put it as a type 1 second degree, type 1 Mobitz second degree AV block.
Are you done, Sagar?
Yes, sir.
You're very right. We have presented very well. Can you make an attempt to localize whether it's supra-ISIN or infra-ISIN from the given leads?
Sir, it looks most likely a supra-Hessian type of a block because QRS morphology is narrow. If it was an infra-Hessian, I would mostly be a broad QRS.
Yeah. So I'll just explain the ECG again for the benefit of the audience. So the key in this ECG is to recognize these P waves which are hidden inside the T waves. The pretty much rounded contour of the T waves and near symmetry should be a clue that some P waves are hiding in there. And the proof of the pudding is that when you have a ventricular ectopic, there is an opportunity to find out the P wave which has now emerged from the T wave. And 2:1 AV block is classified as a distinct entity, neither Mobitz type 1 nor Mobitz type 2. It's best classified as a distinct entity within the second degree AV block. And QRS width gives us a guess or clue towards whether it's supra-ISIN, where it is narrow, versus infra-ISIN, when it is wide. The learning points will be block P waves can be inapparent when they hide within the T waves. T wave pointed, notched, or symmetrical and rounded should be a clue that P waves may be hiding within. And opportunities like spontaneous cycle length changes, post-ectopic pause can be very useful in unmasking the P wave, especially so in Holter analysis rather than the 12 lead ECG.
Yeah, Mukund, can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, Natarajan sir, good evening. Manish here.
Hi, good evening.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mukund, can you put the ECG again?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sagar, there's one point here, the localization of the block, like what you said, couple of things is whether supra-ISIN or infra-ISIN depends upon whether the QRS is narrow or not. But there's a big clue in the conducted PR interval. Always in, this, in conducted intermittent AV blocks, wherein there's some AV conduction, there's a big clue in the conducted PR interval. Now, what does this conducted PR tell you? So the conducted PR interval is absolutely normal.
Answer that question. Manish, let us give an opportunity to him.
Yeah.
Does the conducted PR interval give a clue to the site of the block? According to that is Dr. Manish's question.
Mukund, can I share my screen? Is it possible later on?
Okay.
Can I share my screen? I want to show something.
Yes, sir. After this,
this.
yes, sir. After this, yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Sagar, what do you think?
Sir, conducted PR interval in this case is not very long, sir. Is almost of the normal PR segment length. So that will most likely indicate that it is not being prolonged, meaning it is not getting continuously prolonged as we have seen in type 2 Wenke backing. So which will indicate that it is more likely to be a type 1 and which has a location which is supra-Hessian most of the time.
Yeah, see, Sagar, the thing is, the conducted PR interval. So suppose this disease were to be in the supra-Hessian, like what you're saying, AV node. So if the AV node is diseased, what do you expect the PR interval to be? Even in a first degree block, what do you expect the PR interval to be?
It will be longer, sir.
Prolonged, correct. So if the AV node is involved, you are expecting the conducted PR interval to be prolonged. So in an AV block, intermittent AV conduction, wherein there is some part of the AV conduction which is diseased, if the conducted PR interval conducts with an absolutely normal PR interval, that means the AV node is most likely to be normal. The disease is likely to be intra-Hessian or infra-Hessian. I'll explain with then diagram. Mukund, Sudhakar, can I share my screen?
Mukund sir, can you just for a second?
Yeah, sure. I'll stop sharing now. Yeah, I'll stop my sharing.
Shall I share? Yeah?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Manish.
Yeah. Can you see my screen now?
We can see you. Yeah, your screen also.
Yeah, so this is a normal, P and a QRS complex. So this normal PR interval is made up of 4 points electrophysiological. So you have the PA interval that is from top to the bottom of the RA, that is RA conduction time, which is around 20 milliseconds, which is not, usually considered. Then you have the AH interval. Once it reaches the bottom of the right atrium to across the AV node. So this is the AH interval, which depicts the conduction time across the AV node. So normally, this one, it's around 55 to 100, 115. So I'm just giving an example here. And then you have the HH interval, which is intra-region conduction, which usually is less than 10 milliseconds. And then you have the HV interval, which is between 35 to 55 milliseconds. So you take a normal example. This is a normal PR interval, 150, like in this patient. So of this 150, the major delay is in the AV node. All of you agree, right? So most of this 150 is the time taken for conduction across the AV node. That would be around 80 milliseconds, minimum of 55, maybe around 80 milliseconds. So remaining next part of the delay is conduction between the H and V, infrahesion. That's around 35 milliseconds out of the 150. Less than 5 to 10 milliseconds is intrahesion conduction. It is very rapid. And the very small is RA conduction. Unless the RA is huge, the RA conduction time is negligible. So, now assume if you have an AV node disease, and if you have an His disease, and if you have an infrahesion disease, in each of this, the conduction time doubles. So suppose you have an AV node disease and the conduction time doubles from 80 milliseconds to 3 times. So 240 milliseconds. The overall PR interval is 310. Here the RA conduction is normal, but the AV node is 3 times slower. So it takes 240 milliseconds to conduct across the AV node. The His is normal and the intrahesion is normal. So the overall AH is 310. Now assume that there's a His disease, intrahesion disease, and the conduction time across the His is 3 times as bad. So instead of taking 10 milliseconds, it takes 30 milliseconds to conduct across the His. But the AV node is normal, the PA is normal, and the infra is normal. So overall, the AH interval is still 170. Although the His conduction is 3 times as bad, because the intrahesion conduction time is only 10 milliseconds, even if it is 3 times prolonged, the AH interval is not prolonged at all. It is absolutely normal. And similarly with HV interval, even if the HV conduction time is 3 times as bad, you're adding only 120 milliseconds to the overall PR interval. So the overall PR interval from 150 comes to 230 milliseconds, mild PR prolongation. So the point I'm trying to make here is the PR interval in the conducted P is very important. If there's an AV node disease, you should have PR prolongation. So, the sine qua non of AV node conduct disease is a PR prolongation. So if the conducted P was conducted with a very long PR interval, then this patient had AV node disease. Here, the conducted P is conducted in an absolutely normal PR interval. So most likely this patient has an intrahesion disease. That's why, although the conduction is slow, it's not manifestation in the PR interval. And that's why the QRS is also normal. So if you had an infrahesion disease, probably you would have had a slightly more prolonged PR interval and maybe a bundle branch block morphology. Okay. Is this point clear? Natarajan,
Yes,
sir,
sir.
anything to add?
No. This is something I taught Sagar very recently in a case. I taught him the 4 points. This conducted PR interval, bundle branch block pattern, response to carotid sinus massage, response to exercise. I taught him a week ago. Current generation people have a very short memory. Anyway, good points you're making, right?
No, just an interesting point I thought I should make. That's all.
Absolutely. So in other words, longer the conducted PR interval, more benign the condition is. That's
Yeah.
what Manish is trying to make. AV nodal disease is like an elastic thing. That's the common analogy is elastic versus plastic. The AV node can keep on stretching its conduction. So the PR interval will be unduly prolonged if it's an AV nodal conduction disease, and the PR interval, if it is narrow and if there is a bundle branch block, it means things are not good. It is infrahesion or intrahesion. Okay.
For the lack of time, I will not ask Sagar to explain the reason for this last tweet. I think we'll go to the next ECG, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Azhar, you're there, no? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Sir.
Yeah, Mukund sir, ECG number 4. Yeah.
Yeah, is it visible?
No.
No, sir.
Okay. My PowerPoint is stuck here.
You can unshare and then reattempt sharing.
Yeah.
It might work. Manish has stopped sharing, right?
Yeah, I've stopped, sir.
Okay.
Is it okay now? Is it seen? Yeah.
Now it's fine.
Yes, sir. Good evening, all. I'm Dr. Azhar from Sri Jayadeva Institute, Bangalore. Sir, this is a 12-lead ECG, predominantly showing limb leads with sinus rhythm with the P wave rate of around 70 to 75 and QRS rate of around 40 per minute with 3:1 conduction. Like every 3 beats, 2 beats are being blocked, and the third beat is being conducted, which is showing baseline pacemaker spikes as well, which are pacing at around. I mean, the pacemaker spikes are seen with a frequency of around 35 beats, 35 per minute, which is not sensing and even not capturing as well, but it's only pacing. Only it's showing spikes. And the axis appears to be normal around 70 degrees, plus 70. P wave appears to be slightly taller. And if you see in the second beat from the left, it is followed by QRS, and the morphology of that QRS as well as the fourth QRS, which is again following P wave, is similar. So probably that is being conducted. And the QRS complex morphology before and after that is slightly different. So probably I feel it's a baseline 3 is for every 3 P, one is being conducted, and with a pacemaker, probably a temporary pacemaker, because the spike is tall one, the long one. So probably I feel it's a unipolar lead, and it's not capturing, not even sensing. And the QRS complexes appear to be of normal morphology, whatever appearing. So probably this is not an infra-Hessian disease.
Yeah, very well attempted. I'll give you some history. I should have given it earlier, but that would have put bias. So this is a boy, maybe 17 or 18 years, who has underwent VVI pacemaker some 10 or 12 years ago for congenital complete heart block. He had some lead issues in the past, and this ECG was when interrogation showed very low lead impedance. So what's happening here? Is there any sensing failure? Harsha? Okay, I will explain. So this is complete heart block and a junctional escape. Pacemaker spikes are at 40 per minute. So we don't know why it is low. Maybe it's programmed low, or there may be a hysteresis set in. And there is sensing failure because none of the QRS are being sensed, as well as pacing failure because even spikes falling outside the T wave are not captured. So this is a classical example of sensing as well as pacing failure. In this case, it was due to insulation breach. I will mark the beats. So this spike is clearly falling outside the T wave, and it should have been captured. But it's not captured. This double arrow, double red arrow. Whereas the green stars are clear examples of sensing failure, where QRS ought to have been sensed, but it was not sensed, and the spike came. And the rate is 1040, so 1400 milliseconds, around 40 per minute. We don't know why. Maybe hysteresis or whatever. Anything to be added, sir, or Manish?
Well, I have a doubt, sir.
I've got Mukund, just one point. Can I say?
Yeah, Manish, please go ahead.
This one, the same thing. I mean, about the rate, I mean, definitely there is sensing failure and pacing failure. So the reason would be either, that the lead has got a problem, either it's dislodged or not, this one working properly, or the battery is depleted. So, in this case, would the rate decide between the two? Because, in my mind, if the battery is low, if it's not generating enough output, then the rate will be really low than what is the programmed rate. But if it's only a lead issue, then, with the battery being intact, you will still see the spikes at the set rate at 60 or 70 or something, but you will not have any capture or sensing. So does this, suggest that probably there is EOS also, end of service also?
It's possible. I agree with that. Only thing against that is clockwise regularity of the spikes. EOS usually will have some irregularity in the spikes, but it's very much possible. I agree with you fully. What do you feel, Natarajan, sir?
Yes. Unlike the first case example where there was varying in the pacing intervals, which was attributed to EOL-like behavior, there can be approaching EOL which can have regular pacing intervals also. So as Manish says, this one of the differential diagnosis here is almost approaching EOL, neither sensing nor pacing.
Yeah.
Fully agree with you.
Sir, Dr. Azhar, sir, I have just one doubt here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sir, if we see the first one and second complexes, like if we see in lead one also, it's clear why if there is complete AV block, why it is the morphology is different of the QRS complexes, sir. So for every, the QRS which is following after a P wave is similar, even the second and fourth. Even
You mean second QRS and fourth QRS are different?
Yes, sir. 2, 4, and sixth one, like which is following after a P wave. So it is slightly similar and which is different from the next one QRS, which is not having even a proper.
You mean absence of the Q wave, you mean?
Yes, sir. Q wave, even the S wave, sir. If you see in lead 2, sir, in lead 2, if you see the second QRS having a proper S wave. Third one is not having an S wave. Again, fourth is having an S wave. So I think the morphology is slightly changing. So that reason I thought probably those waves QRS are being conducted from the P wave. So probably a 3:1 conduction with typical or atypical Venki vacuum.
Okay, I'm not sure why it is changing, but I'll share my thoughts. This is happening at the terminal end of the QRS. Usually in normal hearts or normally conducted hearts, junction rhythm including, last portion to be depolarized is the basal right ventricle and its outflow. That is manifested as a R' wave in AVR or a S wave in the lateral or infralateral leads because it goes away from those leads. I think this is delay happening in the basal RV rather than a conducted P because conducted P should have a predictable PR interval.
Okay, sir. But why it is alternating in between QRS, sir? Why it's not regular? Like if it is an outflow tract or something like it should have been in every QRS.
It should have been?
It should have been in every QRS complex. The terminal part of the QRS should have been showing some prolongation as you mentioned, but it is alternating within the QRS complex.
It's not uncommon. I don't know why, but it's not uncommon to see subtle QRS changes cycle to cycle. Probably it has to do with the rate changes as well as respiratory cycle variations, which affect the ERP of the tissue. But I confess I don't have very clear explanation to answer. Sorry, question.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, go to them. Again, my slides are frozen. I'm having difficulty moving the slide. Just a minute. Yeah.
So you can unshare and reshare, sir.
Yeah, I've done
Next case is Dr. Hari.
Good evening. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, Harish, welcome. Please go ahead.
Yes. So this ECG, sir, 12 lead ECG showing a heart rate of around 80 with alternating sinus and junctional premature complexes with ST elevation in 2-3 AVF and reciprocal ST depression in AVL. Probably an inferior wall MI with AV nodal blocks.
Can you summarize it again, please?
Sir, there's alternating sinus beat with premature junctional complex with ST elevation in 2-3 and AVF.
Yeah, that I agree. But you told AV block as well as junctional ectopic.
Sir, probably an inferior wall MI with junctional premature complexes in between regularly.
Okay. Fine. It's a very interesting ECG. I'll go to the answer. This is an RCO occlusion, obviously, inferior MI. And what I wanted to highlight through this ECG is picking up the P waves. You have to train your eyes to pick up the P waves. And if you compare this blue arrow, just watch the ST-T complex where this blue arrow points versus the same events, ST and T, where this red arrow points. You can see a rounded hump-like thing over the T wave And that is the subtle evidence of P wave. And conducted PR is prolonged, as well as probably there is a P somewhere here getting conducted with even longer PR interval, which we are not seeing. Probably this is that notch, small notch, subtle notch. And clearly one P is blocked here. And the same cycle repeats. Here is a P that is conducted. Here we can't see any P clearly, but here is a blocked P. So I would think this has a 3:2 Wenckebach type of AV block, which is very common in inferior wall MI. I'm sure many people may disagree regarding the status of P, but if it is not P, obviously it is junctional ectopy. I would like to know the thoughts of others also. Better answer, Manish.
Whenever you have an inferior wall ST elevation MI of this nature, and you have group beating, the simplest clue is, Mugun, can you show the group beatings of 2, 2?
Yes, sir.
You see group
of 2.
Here there are groups of 2. Sometimes there can be groups of 3 also. Whenever you have group beatings, you should suspect Wenckebach. If there are group beatings of 3 beats, it is 4:3. If there are group beats of 2, like in this case, it is 3:2 Wenckebach. That's what you should suspect in the context of an inferior wall ST elevation myocardial infarction. Whenever you see group beating, suspect AV Wenckebach, AV nodal block, which is very common, as Dr. Mugun said, in inferior wall MI.
You should always use the term bigeminy when you describe such ECGs in your exam.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And some learning points, bigeminy has limited causes. So if you have bigeminy, you just need to see which among these 4, the 5th one is extremely rare, so you can forget it. Among the 4, which one is it? It's only task you need to do. Commonest is perhaps is ectopic bigeminy. Second is block bigeminy, where the block ratio is 3:2. Then less common variants are escape capture bigeminy and echo bigeminy. So escape capture will invariably have a very slow rate, and echo bigeminy also usually will have a very slow rate. And double fire is an extremely rare thing. Hardly once in a lifetime you will see it. So block bigeminy due to 3:2 AV block is a very common finding in inferior wall MI. Usually it resolves on its own. It's Wenckebach type of block. And key in diagnosis is how to pick up the P waves hiding inside the T waves. Manish, you want to add something?
Yeah, Mukund, can you put the ECG back again? One
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
Actually, one more area where you can see the P wave. No, you should look for P wave in all leads. So in AVR, probably you can see the P wave on the T properly. So you can see the P wave in the proper P wave in the second beat of AVR. And
Sure.
then in that, yeah, and even in the previous to that, and the one bit not, yeah, and you can see the P wave probably on the T wave, slightly more regularly in AVR. But yeah, like what Mukund said, you should always look for P in the ST segment, hidden Ps. That's all, yeah.
I'll move to the next.
Yes.
Yeah, ECG 6, yeah, by Dr. Harnish. Harnish.
Good evening, sir.
Hanish, welcome, Hanish.
Good, sir. So this is a 12-lead ECG, which is showing a rate of around 80 beats per minute. There is short PR interval with presence of delta wave suggestive of pre-excitation. So this is a pre-excited ECG with an accessory pathway. Now trying to localize the pathway, if you apply Arida algorithm, so step 1, lead 1 shows a definitely positive delta wave, and V1R is not more than S. So moving to step 2. Step 2, the delta wave is not very clearly visible, but so I am not sure whether it is isoelectric or is it negative. So considering it's a negative, it's an isoelectric delta wave. Moving on to step 3, V1 shows an initial positive delta wave followed by QRS. So moving to step 4, if it's a right lateral, so that means it's right free wall pathway. In the right free wall pathway, the AVF shows negative delta. So it's most likely a right posterior free wall pathway, sir.
Are you over? Finish?
And also there is a typical pattern, sir, showing V1 has a negative QRS followed by V2, which is a predominantly positive, and then V3, which is negative. So this is a typical of right posterior pathway, sir. Most likely it's a right posterior pathway.
Okay, Anish. So attempted it well. You're over now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Anything about these last 3 or 4 complexes, Arni?
So last 3 or 4 complexes have some irregularity there, sir. Yes, sir. And there is some axis change also if we see in the rhythm strip. The last 3-4 beats have a predominantly positive QRS instead of negative, which was in the previous beats. So I could not really explain it why it's happening. Maybe it's because of I don't know if it's respiratory variations leading to loss of pre-excitation or what is it. I'm not really sure, sir, about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Arnish. You've done it really well. Actually, I didn't mean to localize the pathway in this ECG, so I will not be discussing on that part. What I wanted to highlight is this effect called concertina effect. It's a very rare ECG finding, and I find it very fascinating as well. So, what is concertina effect is? Concertina, for all your information, is a musical instrument akin to accordion. It's not accordion, but similar one, bellows one. And if you pull the strings together, the bellows play out. So the effect was described in a Scandinavian journal in 1944. Now the term is loosely used rather, but in the strictest sense, what concertina effect means is when you have a sinus rate accelerating versus slowing, pre-excitation varies. What exactly happens is when you have a slower heart rate, PP interval is longer, you get less pre-excitation, whereas when PP interval is shorter, you get more pre-excitation. And as I have marked here the PP interval is 800 milliseconds. There is pre-excitation. There's a slower heart rate. Sorry, I think I have confused you. When atrial rate is slower, you will get more pre-excitation. That is, PP interval is longer, you get more delta wave. And when sinus accelerates, PP interval now is 600 towards the end of the strip. There is less pre-excitation or loss of pre-excitation. You don't find any delta wave here. Even here, again, sinus rate slows down and pre-excitation is back. This beat appears confusing, but the corresponding beats in V5 and V6 as well as V4 show pre-excitation. Perhaps it's subtle in that complex in this lead 2. Next beat you can see it has come back again. So slower heart rate, pre-excitation is there, and faster heart rate, pre-excitation disappears. All this happens during sinus cycle length changes, that's sinus arrhythmia. This is called concertina effect. Important thing about concertina effect is that usually and consistently, it will represent a pathway with a long ERP, that is low risk pathway. So it's a form of pre-excitation where cyclically sinus cycle length changes determine the pre-excitation, and it's correlated with low risk type of pathways. And it's a very rare ECG. I've seen only one in my career so far. Veteran sir, can you please add something more?
Only one thing to add is the fact that you said when it became 600 milliseconds, the pre-excitation disappears. Maybe your first explanation was correct. Varying degrees of pre-excitation is more likely rather than loss of pre-excitation when the atrial rate became faster, because if you look at V4 to V6, along with the faster rate, these are all simultaneously acquired ECGs.
Yeah.
So if you look at V4, V5 and V6, when the rate is faster, the pre-excitation is still there in those ECGs. So I would vote for varying degrees of pre-excitation rather than loss of pre-excitation when the atrial rate went up. That's what I would say.
That's exactly true, sir. That's how it is described, concertina effect. I think I made a mistake by telling loss of pre-excitation, but exactly as you told, varying degree of pre-excitation. The faster rate, less pre-excitation, slower rates, more pre-excitation.
Manish, you want to say something? Manish?
Nothing, sir. Very nice ECG and very nice explanation.
We'll go to the
Dr.
next.
Mukund, just out of that, is it possible for like in an easier way to localize the pre-excitation for the residents, just in a so that in this ECG?
Actually, I never follow any algorithm. I'm sure Manish also may not be following, as well as Nagraj sir. We just go by the axis. The 12 lead, we picturize the 12 leads in our mind and see delta wave axis and try to localize it. So in simple terms, it's pretty oversimplified. If V1 has a totally negative QRS in a fully pre-excited or reasonably pre-excited ECG, if it is not delta wave, totally negative QRS, then probably it's a right side pathway. Whereas a totally positive QRS, when pre-excitation is full or to a significant degree, suggests a left side pathway. early transition by V2 or V3, it's delta wave transits, not QRS, maybe delta wave transits, then it's probably near to the septum rather than free wall. Whereas late transition corresponds to free wall location, especially in the right side. Similarly, I look at inferior leads. If all of them have negative delta, here not the QRS but the delta, something is going away from the inferior leads. So in the case of left ventricle, whatever is inferior is also posterior. So we call it a posterior pathway, whereas everything or all the leads coming towards the inferior leads, 2-3 AVF, then you call it anterior or superior. Both are the same for the LV because of its oblique line. So we localize it to the anterior. These are the 3 steps with which you can expect reasonable localization, maybe around 90% of time. Any easier way, sir? Sir Manish?
Yeah, this one, the same thing. I mean, it's difficult to follow algorithm. One more thing about localization, why it's important is, it's important during ablation to know where exactly it is coming from. So now the downside about ECG localization is why, you cannot completely precisely do it is, it's not maximally pre-excited. So usually if you have a maximally pre-excited ECG, you will localize properly. So, but in these ECGs, you can see there's a varying conduction between the AV node and the pathway. So it's not a completely pre-excited ECG. So, this one, you might not be completely accurate in localizing it on a not maximally excited, pre-excited ECG. But otherwise, as a rough rule, like what Mukund said, if you can follow the, the V1 and the axis, you will more or less be able to tell you where the pathway is coming from.
One more clue, very useful clue is if you have 2, 3 and AVF, all of them positive, only 2 locations of pathway are possible. One is left lateral pathway, second is right anteroseptal pathway. Because you usually don't have left anteroseptal pathway, remaining 2 locations are right anteroseptal or left lateral pathway, if all of them are positive. That's a useful clue I found.
Right.
I think we should move forward because this purpose was not actually localizing the pathway. We have another very interesting, another 10 more ECGs. We'll go forward.
Yeah.
Next is Dr. Monica. You're there, Dr. Monica?
Monica?
Dr. Monica?
We'll go to the 8th and come back later then.
Yes, sir. Dr.
I'll just hide my screen because I will have to go through the answer.
Dr. Nishant, you're there?
Yeah.
Rahul, Monica, the host, he can't unmute apparently.
I'm ready with question 8. Who's presenting question 8?
Actually, I think they have actually somehow I think their connection went off. And
okay. Who's the person with question 9?
Rahul, can you unmute Dr. Monica? I'll just do sir, just for,
Just let me know which question I should
go to question 7, sir. You can
Monica,
go to
yes, sir.
yeah. Sorry, sir. You can go to question 7. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just my PowerPoint is stuck. Give me a minute. Yes, question 7 is for Dr. Monica.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Monica from KMC Manipal. So my patient is 8 years old boy presented with heart failure. Echo and CAT study suggestive of restrictive physiology. ECG, I'll go ahead. The ECG is a 12-lead ECG with normal standardization. Heart rate is around 50 per minute. It's regular. Axis is rightward axis. P waves are absent. Only one conspicuous P wave can be seen in the last complex. However, it looks like a junctional rhythm to me. And there is a interventricular conduction delay and repolarization abnormalities seen in V1 to V4. So my DDs in this case, with this clinical presentation, I would like to go for endomyocardial fibrosis or Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And ECG wise, it looks like a junctional rhythm to me. Or if DDs as per ECG, I would consider junctional rhythm or sinoatrial block.
Yeah. You attempted it well. So before going to the major point in ECG, I will just take some passing analysis of this ECG. There's no PO, as Monica has pointed out, so it's probably a junctional rhythm. And we know that it's an 8-year-old patient with heart failure and restrictive physiology. So I just want to bring your attention to this QRS complexes. The voltages are preserved and there is significant splintering of the QRS. So this usually intraventricular conduction defect, in the sense QRS is wide, but not fitting into typical LVB nor RVB. Then you call it IVCD or intraventricular conduction defect. It correlates with risk of sudden death due to arrhythmias as well as heart failure. What this notching suggests is either a scar in the left ventricle or there is a physiological pathological conduction delay where you can see two wavefronts colliding with each other. There is significant delay in the ventricular conduction due to whatever reason, due to muscular reason, Purkinje fiber reason, or both. And relatively preserved voltages, this is not relevant in 8-year-old boy, but in elderly patients with cardiomyopathy, you can try to make an attempt based on these voltages, whether it's ischemic or non-ischemic. Then lastly, this deep symmetrical TVO changes reflect repolarization abnormality, usually due to myopathy. And most importantly, I also want to bring attention to this notch. It's very subtle, but somebody asked that why that terminal S wave in that patient's ECG. You can see here that this notch is significantly different from this notch. This is because of varying degrees of delay between cardiac cycles. If you ask me why, I don't know, but that's how you explain it. So it's not very uncommon finding. You can see that same finding in V5 also. The pattern of notching is different from beat to beat. And most importantly, I wanted to show this ECG to highlight the absence of P wave. So in some situations, the absence of P wave should be taken very seriously. One is sick sinus syndrome and tachybrady syndrome, because something called atrial paralysis or atrial standstill, which is known to occur as a primary abnormality in sick sinus syndrome, and secondary abnormality in many of the cardiomyopathies, classically in residual cardiomyopathy, and also after some congenital heart disease, myocarditis, other atrial diseases. There is a large list, but most importantly, sick sinus syndrome and cardiomyopathies. So this carries a very high risk of stroke and embolic event, even higher than that of atrial fibrillation. So identifying it is very important because timely anticoagulation can prevent these embolic events, especially stroke. Ideal way to diagnose it is an EP study, either in the EP lab or if you have a pacemaker implanted, increase the atrial lead pacing output to the maximum and prove that atrium is inexcitable. Then only you can be sure that it is atrial paralysis. But you should always suspect when you don't have a P wave, it may be junctional rhythm. Even there is no retrograde P wave as well as antegrade P wave, it's highly likely that in a patient with cardiomyopathy, you are dealing with atrial paralysis. And this opportunity should never miss, because I have seen at least 2 or 3 patients with stroke, especially the pediatric age group with stroke is a very painful thing to see. I think I'm done with this ECG. Invite Natran sir as well as Manish for further inputs.
Nothing in particular. Most of the important points you have already brought out, Mukund. Because in an 8-year-old boy, you don't see normally this absence of P waves. The differential diagnosis is, as you already said, atrial paralysis or standstill. Other could be fine atrial fibrillation also. So very, very fine atrial fibrillation where you're not seeing the fibrillary P waves is also another diagnosis. If it is that case, if that is the case, it is atrial fibrillation with complete AV block because the RR intervals are regular. So that is the only differential diagnosis you should keep in mind. Manish, you want to...
Nothing, Mukul. We'll go to the next one, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Monica.
8th one is by Dr. Nishant. Dr. Nishant, you're there?
Should I show 8th or 9th, Dr.?
Sir, 8th, sir.
I'm again stuck with my presentation.
Dr. Nishant, you can unmute yourself, sir.
Just 8-1.
Dr. Nishant, you're there? You're not audible. Dr. Nishant, you're not audible. Okay, sir, can we come back to it, sir, if it is possible? I think some
Yeah, sure. I'll go to 9. Give me 2 minutes.
By Dr. Rajesh. Dr. Rajesh, you're there?
Is he there?
Dr. Rajesh?
Dr. Rajesh, you can unmute yourself.
I'll show 9. Shall I show 9?
Can you go to 10th, sir? 10th.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Coming back.
Gaurav Pandey.
Good evening, sir. My voice is there. Sir.
Hey,
Good evening, sir.
Gaurav.
Good evening, sir. Dr. Gaurav here from Amla Hospital, sir.
Yeah, welcome,
Thank you,
Gaurav.
sir. Yes, sir. Sir, the history given is a 68-year man with who presents with a chest discomfort and no history of syncope or pre-syncope, sir. On looking on the ECG is a 12-lead ECG with lead to rhythm strip, sir. Normal standardization, normal calibration. So it's a broad, complex, regular tachycardia with heart rate of around 150 per minute. And some morphology is QR or RBB patterns, sir, in V1, sir, with right axis deviation, sir, because AVR is positive and lead 1 is equiphasic. Extreme right axis, yes, sir. So RBB with right axis deviations, and there's also we can see ST elevation in V2 and V3. V2 and V3 ST elevation. And sir, on the rhythm strip, sir, we can see, sir, there is a AV dissociation, sir, with P waves in lead 2, we can see the P wave with lead 6 P wave, small notching of P wave, lead 9 P wave. So, sir, the ventricular rate is more than the atrial rate. So, it is most probably, sir, a patient with a 68-year-old man with chest pain, chest discomfort, sir, ACS, STEMI with QRBB. Most probably anterior wall MI, sir. And for localization, if you can go, sir, V1 is QRBB is positive with AVR positive. So, proximal LAD can be the occlusion, the site of occlusion, sir. So my plan will be top eye and echo, and plan for if a patient is ready, will take for a primary, sir.
Extent, man. What extent will give?
Okay, sir.
What is the rhythm?
Rhythm, sir, AV disso. Regular, broad complex regular tachycardia, sir.
VT, is it SVT with aberrancy?
VT, sir, VT, because AV dissociations in lead 2, we can see the AV dissociation. So VT, sir, slow VT.
Okay. Gaurav, would you like to localize the vessel during a VT ECG?
Yes, sir. Actually, sir, QRBB pattern, sir. Actually, I went with the QRBB pattern. So I was.
But that makes sense only during sinus rhythm, right?
Sir, ST elevation in V2 and V3. So I was thinking can be a.
Fine. Good, Gaurav.
Okay.
Made a good attempt in reading it. I'll just add some points or corrections. Yeah. First and foremost, we say white chorus tachycardia. There's no doubt on that. It's white, it's regular, as well as it's tachycardia. And regarding axis, Gaurav, you should never look one lead and tell the axis. Like AVR positive means right axis. It's not correct because extreme left axis as well as extreme right axis can cause AVR positivity. Once you have AVR positivity, what should you look at is AVL and lead 3. If AVL is positive as well as AVR is positive, it's extreme left axis, like in this case. Whereas AVR is positive along with lead 3 positivity, it is extreme right axis.
Extreme left axis.
Yeah.
If 1 is negative, 2 is positive, then right axis.
Oh, okay.
We have to go with AVL and
Just I will say 1 or 2. Because
AVL and lead.
AVL we take we miss a 1 minus 20 minus 10, we will make it as left axis. That's why we should take 2.
Okay, so this is RBB and left axis, not right axis. One. Second thing, you correctly identify the ST elevation in V1 and V2. Actually, this ECG was referred to as a vesicular VT. That's why I kept it in this discussion. Whereas actually it was anterior ST elevation MI due to proximal LAD occlusion, as Gaurav rightly mentioned, but for wrong reasons. This is a sinus rhythm. You can see the P wave clearly here in V3 as well as V2. It's one-to-one AV relation. Apparent AV dissociation in lead 2 is not correct. Even in lead 2, you can see the same fixed PR interval and P waves prominent in some complexes, inconspicuous in others, but not absent. And in V3, you can clearly see 1:1 T driving the QRS, and ST is elevated and distorting the QRS. We'll call it in the olden classical teaching Sclerosky grade 2 type of ST elevation. So what actually it was is proximal LAD occlusion. This patient underwent primary class T also, but I kept it here because it was referred as a vesicular VT. Before I show you another ECG to convince anyone left out better, I will invite Natarajan sir and Manish for their comments.
Another point in favor of SVT with aberrancy, forget sinus tachycardia, is the fact that the initial part of the QRS complex is very, very swift. All the delay is actually in the later half of the QRS complex. Mugun, can you just show D2, 3 AVF for that matter?
Yeah.
That,
Initial
that's correct.
upstroke.
That the initial upstroke as well as the descending limb of the QRS complex is very, very swift.
Yeah, it's even better identifying V5 and V4.
That's correct.
Next.
So the most of the delay in the QRS complex in the distal, the subsequent half of the QRS complex rather than the first initial portion of the QRS, which also is a point in favor of a supraventricular tachyarrhythmia.
Manish, you want to add?
No, Mukund. I think there'll be more clarity when you show the next ECG.
Yeah, I'm showing the next ECG. This RBB left axis deviation with sinus tachycardia. ST elevation distorts the QRS, mimics posterior vesicular VT, and now you can even better see the P waves. I'll suggest lead 2 as well as V3. Best seen in V3. Shall I proceed to the next?
Yeah, please.
Sudhakar, which one should I show?
Sir, you go to 11, then we'll come back to 8 and 9.
Fine.
Dr. Afzar, you're there?
This is the same patient's evolving ECG. Now shows ST elevation and sinus rhythm at slower heart rate. Now going to a learning point from that ECG. Careful analysis of ECG should be lead by lead as well as beat by beat. That is very crucial, especially in fast heart rates. Identifying P wave cannot be overemphasized. This is the third ECG which I am showing to highlight importance of identifying P waves. And when diagnosing something by pattern recognition, like for example, vesicular VT, it is important to exclude other causes. This is case 11.
Dr. Afzar, you're there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Be a little louder. Huh? Yeah. Thank you.
This case has two ECGs. I'll show one by one. This is the tachycardia ECG. I'll show the sinus ECG after Upsell concurs or describes this.
Yes, sir. This is a 12 lead ECG with showing right axis deviation with P waves are you can see the P waves followed by a QRS complex, and there is a splintered QRS in V1 followed by it looks like a broad complex tachycardia.
Yeah. Now I'll show you the basal ECG. This is the basal ECG.
In this baseline ECG, we can see P waves clearly, followed by a QRS complex, and there is right axis deviation, and looks like a RBBB with query LPHP
and first line PR prolongation, sir. Probably a trifascicular block like a picture.
Yeah. Now we'll go to tachycardia ECG again. Can you just relook into the tachycardia in the light of the basal ECG? I consider it as a very big blessing to have a basal ECG when a patient with comes with tachycardia. We don't always have that luxury.
Yes, sir.
But now we have both here. This is the basal ECG. Another 20 seconds, 10 seconds for you. Now we'll go to the tachycardia ECG. So you want to commit on one or other? Wild card tachycardia, SVT with aberrancy versus AVT.
Yes, sir. SVT versus aberrancy. I would
This is
go
what you're
for it,
feeling.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. I'll show the answer. This is the basal ECG.
Yes.
And this is actually against the rule type of ECG. Generally, what we teach is when you have basal ECG and tachycardia ECG similar in morphology, it's highly likely that it is SVT with aberrancy. And in that sense, you are right also. But the key in this ECG is identifying the AV dissociation. You can see it as red marked arrows, P waves sitting here, and best seen in this AVR, this P wave. It's not consistent, it's not there for all complexes. Even in lead 2 here, you can see AV dissociation like here. So now we have a AV dissociation ECG with similar morphology as basal rhythm, and the basal rhythm itself shows intraventricular conduction defect, maybe bifascicular block or even trifascicular block, or maybe just an IVCD, whatever. But what we know is there is a conduction delay in the His-Purkinje system. That itself is a substrate for two types of VT. One commoner one is bundle branch reentrant VT, which itself is rare, and even more rare is interfascicular VT. So these type of ECGs can have very much similar morphology to the basal rhythm. And very important clue here is AV dissociation. If you are fortunate, you may see it. If it's very fast, you may not be able to decipher it. And another major clue is basal ECG itself will show conduction defects. Commonly IVCD, but can be typical LVD also. And aortic stenosis with IVCD is perhaps a substrate for not aortic stenosis, but that IVCD, because calcific disease is known to affect the aortic valve as well as the conduction system. Leaves disease record. And in this case, we consider it as it was non-inducible during the EP study, so we cannot be very sure. But we thought it was either upper septal or interfascicular VT. And when you have morphology similar to that basal rhythm, it becomes very hard to find out fusion beats as well as capture beats. So that also adds to the confusion. So learning points, basal ECG comparison is a very useful tool in differentiating SVT versus SVT with aberrancy versus VT. Usually, but not always, that's very important, not always, the similar QRS pattern suggests SVT with aberrancy. And upper septal VT and interfascicular VT are very rare types of arrhythmias, and they can have exactly same QRS complex as during sinus rhythm. Anything to add, Manish or Natarajan sir? We'll go to
No, we'll go to unless Manish wants to say.
Nothing, sir. The same thing. We can go ahead, I think.
Sir, case number 8, can you get it?
I'll just pause and see this.
Yeah, 8 and 9.
Yeah, first I'll go to 8.
Dr. Nishant, you're there. If you're not there, can you just, I think there is some audio issue at his end, sir. So I think he told he will.
Okay, 9 will go.
Dr. Nishant, if you, possible for you to unmute.
Should I show 9?
Yeah, Dr. Rajesh, you're there? Rajesh?
Anybody else want to volunteer from the crowd?
I think Dr. Rajesh is there, sir. Rajesh, you're there? Okay. Sir, can we discuss just 2 ECGs?
Yeah, anyone want to volunteer? Impromptu?
Anybody who wants to volunteer can just drop a message in the chat box, because I think few of them have some.
Sir, I have allowed them to unmute right now.
Right.
Sir, I'm Rajesh.
Yeah, Rajesh. Yeah.
It's 8 or 9?
9.
9.
9.
Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Rajesh, KMC Mangalore. This is the rhythm strip ECG with normal axis and non-sinus P waves because negative P waves are seen in lead 2, and typical sawtooth appearance is in lead 2 and 3 and AVF with negative deflection, and with the positive deflection seen in lead AVL and AVR. With the options of isolated baseline suggestion of atrial flutter, sir. Along with that, there is heart block also there. In some leads, it is 6:1 conduction block is there. In some leads, 4:1 conduction block is there. My diagnosis is atrial flutter with variable heart block, sir. Mostly patient on digoxin treatment. So we have to see any digoxin toxicity is there. That's all, sir.
Okay. Is it variant conduction? Is it AV block or varying AV conduction?
Varying.
Rajesh, is the RR interval fixed or not?
RR interval fixed, sir.
I know it's difficult to eyeball, especially if you don't have WhatsApp ECG. I hope you have seen it in the laptop, because unless you measure it, the difference cannot be made out. Okay, fine. So thanks for that. Yeah. So this is actually a regular RR interval. I'm not sure everyone will be able to appreciate it. It's around 8 large boxes. It's constant around 8 large boxes. So we have an atrial flutter with a slow ventricular response, and more importantly, a regular ventricular response. The flutter wave is regular, and RR interval is regular, and flutter to QRS, similar to PR interval. You have to measure this flutter to QRS interval. That is extremely varying. Like this is short, this is longer, this is even longer, this is short, and one of them was pretty short. Like this is pretty short. And another clue is that this RR interval is not a multiple of this PP interval or flutter interval. This is 8 large boxes. This is around 1.5 large boxes. It should have been 7.5 or 10. So it's 8. So this is an atrial flutter with complete heart block rather than varying AV conduction. Telling points here are the regular RR interval during atrial fibrillation almost always indicates coexisting complete heart block. But during flutter, it may be a fixed AV conduction ratio or a coexisting complete heart block. The clue here is flutter to QRS interval, which remains constant in fixed AV conduction, whereas it varies when there is complete heart block. It can be confusing because the immediate preceding flutter wave may not be conducted. What is conducted may be the one even before that. So it's always helpful to see the interval and see whether RR interval is a multiple of that. If it is a fixed multiple of that, probably it's varying AV conduction rather than a complete heart block. But they are totally different. Most likely you are dealing with complete heart block. Similarly, an irregular RR with a fixed QRS morphology suggests AV conduction is intact during flutter as well as fibrillation. Anything to add, Manish?
Nothing.
That answer?
Oh, you proceed.
Yeah.
QRS interval is something very interesting to, very clearly it is absolutely irregular. That is a sign that there is no relationship between the flutter and the ventricular activity. That means it's an escape rhythm and not a conducted QRS. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, only one more ECG. If we have speaker for, presenter for that, we'll continue. Otherwise, I think we'll stop here. Sudhakar, we got presenter for that?
Rajesh, can you attempt that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mukund, I think if nobody there, Rajesh might not be able to attempt it.
Fine, I will show it.
Yeah, you can show it.
Thank you, Rajesh.
The person had lost his net connection, sir. So.
Hello.
Yeah, this is the ECG. Rajesh, you want to attempt?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's with lead ECG, sir. Looking normal sinus with normal axis. With the heart rate around, with ventricle rate around 42 and atrial atrial rate around
100.
Atrial rate around 150, sir.
Yeah, fine.
It's looking 100, sir. Mostly two is to one heart. Sir, 2:1 heart block, sir.
2:1 heart block.
Sir, 3:1 heart block.
Yeah, correct. I'll go to the explanation without wasting my. He's right. You are pretty much right. You have every third PO is conducted. Yeah, this is conducted. This is blocked. This is blocked. Again, this is conducted, and whatever conducted is conducted with a constant PR interval. And it follows the same throughout the rhythm strip. You have at least 6 complexes or 7 complexes. It's not a facetious relationship. That's what I want to highlight. It's a constant conducted PR interval. And probably it's intra or infra ECN because QRS is wide. If you note V1, though it doesn't appear wide in many leads, in V1 it's very clearly wide as well as V3. So it's intra or infra or a combination of both causing 3:1 heart block. And I think if someone calls this Mobitz type 2 AV block, they are right. And if someone calls this high grade AV block, they are also right. I think it is very rare to find a Mobitz type 2 heart block. I have seen only 2 or 3 ECGs in my entire experience. This is one among them. 2:1 is more common, but fixed PR interval, higher ratios, I have not seen much. So this is a Mobitz type 2 3:1 block with constant PR interval. And high grade AV block happens when random conducted beats with most P's are blocked, but some are getting conducted. But if you include the widest definition of high grade AV block, this also falls into high grade AV block. Usually we commonly in clinical practice, we use the definition when that randomness is there. There's no fixed pattern. Some of them are conducted, but most of them are blocked. Then we call high grade AV block. But in the strictest sense, this also is a high grade AV block. And of course, wide QRS of the conducted beat suggests a infra ECN level of AV block. I think I'm done. Any questions to be discussed, Sudhakar?
I think that people can unmute themselves and I ask directly for the next 10 minutes if you are there. I think we can allow them to do it directly. And I think sir has to do Natarajan sir has to do.
Natarajan sir.
Yeah. Anyway, you guys can continue. It was a pleasure listening to Dr. Mukund and Manish discussing ECGs in such great detail. So it was I'm sure all of you must have been immensely benefited by this. We'll have more of these sessions in the future also. I thank Dr. Sudhakar Rao for having invited me to be part of this. It was a great pleasure and wish all the postgraduates all the very best in their exams as well as in their careers, more in their careers than in the examination. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us and making it pleasure.
Anybody has any doubt, I think they can unmute them themselves and ask the question.
Sir, it's not a doubt. Will you please be kind enough to conduct such a session on how to decipher the local pathway in WBW syndrome or other AVRTs?
Right. We'll try and we'll get back to you definitely. Thank you for the feedback.
Definitely we can do it, but I would suggest to focus more on diagnosis of WPW, AVRT and AVNRT rather than pathway localization. Honestly, it's not very important unless you are planning an ablation to localize the pathway. All the pathways electrophysiologically are the same. And it's more important to recognize the pathway and differentiate it from other differentials like AVNRT, atypical AVNRT. So, but of course, we can arrange a session on that. I presented last year exactly the same session. But your focus should be on ECG approach to narrow QRS tachycardia rather than pathway localization. That is more important.
Sir, good evening, sir. One question, sir. Is it always possible to very confidently say that a given case of a wide QRS tachycardia is an SVT with aberrancy versus VT?
No, it's not 100% at all. There are exceptions to every described algorithm, except when you have a fusion beat. Even capture beat is not as specific, but if you have fusion beat, then even AV dissociation is not that specific. You have non-VT arrhythmias where you can have AV dissociation. Similarly, you can have non-VT arrhythmias where you can have capture beats. But if you have fusion beats, perhaps it's almost always going to be VT. All other algorithms, criteria, findings have exceptions to the rule. And all the rules which you see based on QRS morphology are exactly applicable to antitomic AVRT because that also follows muscle-to-muscle conduction bypassing the Purkinje system. So in that way, you can never be very sure by ECG alone. The surest finding I would say is fusion beat if they are present. You can expect them in the order of 20% only. Only 20% wide QRS tachycardia ECGs will have a fusion beat.
Absolutely. So I think that's what the 2 points, like antidromic AVRT in every respect behaves like a VT only morphologically. So just by morphology, it's difficult. You have to go by the hardcore findings of a fusion beat and AV dissociation, but still you may have an AV dissociation in non-VTs also. Second thing is when if you have a baseline IVCD and a wide QRS tachycardia in that patient, it's very, very difficult to make whether it's an SVT with aberrancy or this one, what VT, because the morphology criteria do not fit there. So there, in such cases of, you will definitely have to look for AV dissociation, like the ECG Mukund showed. So you will have to look for AV dissociation or fusion beats to be sure. So it's not 100%. Yeah, maybe around 90 or 95% in a wide QRS tachycardia, just by ECG you'll be able to tell. In another 5%, it will definitely fool you, especially if there's a baseline, IVCD.
And there is a contrary thing also. Some of the VTs can be narrow QRS and mimic SVT.
I think the thing in ECGs is no pattern recognition. Never try to recognize a pattern and say whether it's an SVT, VT, or any other ECG at least. So you have to, use common sense and reasoning to, and to identify and diagnose an ECG.
Spend your time focusing the P wave, identifying the P wave, confirming its P wave for sure. That will give you the highest yield among diagnoses. Then we try to find a mathematical pattern between atrial activation and ventricular activation. Only these two are possible to decipher in surface ECG, either the P wave or the QRS. You can't guess how the ECG is getting activated unless you have an EP study. So we have only two things to look for, P wave and QRS, and establish a relation between the two. There's no confusion when P is more than QRS or QRS is more than P. But when they're 1:1, then confusions can happen.
And Dr. Mukund.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, proceed.
Can I ask a question, sir? Sir, how to differentiate? I mean, first time I saw this interfascicular VT. So what are the bold points we should remember to diagnose interfascicular VT?
First of all, it's extremely rare event. You may never see it again in your career. It's so rare. Second, generally these patients have baseline conduction disturbances. Thirdly, it's very hard to diagnose that just based on surface ECG. But important clue would be activation pattern similar to sinus rhythm. And if you are very fortunate, I've never seen, but it's logical, it's very much possible. May not be probable, but it's possible. If you have the same VT recorded at different times, once with right axis, next time with left axis. That is once with clockwise type of reentry, next time with counterclockwise type of reentry. That also suggests an interfascicular reentry by surface ECG. But overall, it's very hard to diagnose from surface ECG. I wanted to show that example just to cite that no rule is applicable uniformly in wide QRS tachycardia differentiation. So clinching on AV dissociation, fusion, and capture beats should be done meticulously to make the differential.
Yeah, so that's what you should have a baseline conduction system disease most often for a bundle branch or an interfascicular reentry. So like the case which Mukund showed also, it had a fascicular block. So only those are the substrates for a reentry within the bundle branch system. So you should have a baseline, that one bundle branch block or an IVCD to facilitate these things. But as Mukund said, they are very, very rare. So and very, very rare to find out.
Important any reentry to sustain. You have two concepts. One is wavelength and the path length. So there should be optimal balance of these two so that reentry can occur, the substrate for reentry. And it's extremely difficult for a normal heart to have a reentrant arrhythmia because computerized models have been created and they have found out you need a myocardial fiber length of 3 yards. That is 9 feet to induce a re-entry just by the path length. And wavelength, Purkinje fiber is the fastest among all the conduction tissues in the heart. So it's very unusual to have bundle branch or fascicular re-entry, not fascicular VT, but interfascicular re-entry in normal hearts. So that's why, unless there is a basal conduction delay as marked by IVC or bundle branch blocks, it's unusual to get a interfascicular or bundle branch re-entry in VT. So don't bother about it much. It's very rare. Perhaps you will never see it again also.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Mukund, that interfascicular VT, which is a narrow QRS irregular with AV dissociation, is JET a close differential for that?
Yeah, upper septal VT is more closer related to JET. So I don't know whether we have to discuss this here, but narrow QRS.
No, just I wanted to.
Yeah, narrow QRS tachycardia with AV dissociation. You can think of 5 differential diagnoses. All of them are very rare. Maybe commonest one you are likely to see is JET, that too in post-op pediatric patients.
Yeah, because the history was against that.
Yeah, infraatrial supraventricular. That's the localization of most of these circuits. Second, maybe AVNRT, where you have a upper common pathway block. So only QRS is getting activated, P waves are getting blocked. So that will also mimic like a VT, but it will be pretty narrow and just like normal QRS. Third and fourth one are very much described, but extremely rare, nodovascular and nodoventricular reentrant tachycardias. And fifth one, it is not uncommon. As electrophysiologist, once in a while you may see upper septal VT. It is just similar to fascicular VT, but that abnormal tissue is very much proximal in the upper septum. And re-entry occurs at that level itself. And QRS will be pretty narrow. And AV dissociation may happen. Or sometimes it may be AV association also if there is healthy retrograde conduction. So these are the 5 causes of narrow QRS tachycardia with VA dissociation. All of them are rare. Anyone really interested in ECGs can learn it and try to differentiate also. But commonest time we are likely to encounter is JET. Theoretical one is intra-Hessian re-entry. It is always described but never seen or reported so far. Intra-Hessian re-entry, another the 6th one. If someone wants to get more confused.
I think you
somebody
need
was
to differentiate these things.
Right, sir. Somebody
Like
asked, is there any
practical
point to diagnose, practical points for diagnosing Mahim fiber tachycardia? Like somebody is asking. Yeah.
I think it's very important to recognize it that such entity is there because it's not very rare, especially in a populous country like ours. It's a very exciting riddle for the electrophysiologist, and it is very much confused with VT. We have, I'm sure Manish also would have seen patients ending up in ICD as a treatment for Mahim fiber tachycardia, thinking that it is a VT. So in that way, it's very important to recognize a Mahim fiber tachycardia because it's a curable entity. It's structurally normal heart. Once you are able to ablate, you are offering cure.
Yeah, I think along with it, LBEB and late transition in Mahim fiber. So, this one. Another clue is they've reported in sinus rhythm a small S wave in lead 3, RS complex in lead 3. So you have an LBEB tachycardia with late transition, looks like an SVT which responds to adenosine. And then you take in sinus rhythm ECG, if you have an RS in lead 3, more likely than not, you have a Mahim fiber, especially if you can show varying degrees of pre-excitation. But, to be sure, you need an EP study to confirm whether it's a Mahim fiber. So, but you can get a clue from the ECG, in a white QRS LBEB tachycardia, whether it's a Mahim fiber or not.
Right.
Yeah, another subtle clue is that in sinus ECG, you will get loss of septal Q waves. You expect V5, V6 will have small Q wave. Here, because the pathway is pre-exciting the ventricular septum from right to left, that septal Q can be masked. So that will be a very subtle clue in basal ECG towards presence of a Mahim fiber. Because these fibers have a slow conducting AV node-like segment, almost always you will never see a delta wave. They're slow to conduct. Unless during tachycardia, you may not see, unlike in WPW, you will not see a full pre-excitation or significant pre-excitation in Mahim fiber tachycardia or in sinus ECG in Mahim. Subtle clue is that S wave, as Manish told, as well as absence of Q waves, septal Q wave.
Right. I think if there are no more questions, I will conclude here. We already had a long session.
Yeah.
So,
excellent presentation, Mukund.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, Sudhakar, for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Manish. Thank you, Dr. Mukund, sir, for
thank you all
giving
the
us.
presenters also.
and they have taken time from all this COVID duties and all, and came here to present the ECGs. Yeah, so we'll conclude. Dr. Rahul, if you have a word, you can just put in.
Very good evening, everyone, once again. And let me at the outset thank you, the speakers, Dr. Natarajan as a moderator, and thank you, Dr. Manish Rai and Dr. Mukund Prabhu for your excellent deliberations, and thank you, Sudhakar Rao sir, for this academic initiative. Our platform is always available for such kind of academic initiative like the PG Bonanza webinar series, wherein we have consistently doing the programs. Any such initiatives in the times to come, we will always be there to support. Thank you and take care. Thank you, everyone, sir.
Thank you. We'll stop here.
Thank you.